Today we are going to discuss the structure of the bone. This is the second part of the same lecture which we started last week, and you must remember that we discussed different types of the bones, and before that we discussed the significance of the bones, what different functions it performs for the animal's body, especially in the chordate system, and then we classified the bones into different groups based on the different criteria. Today we are going to discuss the structure of the bone. Our main learning objectives for today's lecture would include understanding the cellular composition of the bones, meaning what the bone is made up of in terms of the organic cells, and what the non-cellular components are there in the bone that provide the basic support and the framework for the bone matrix. Then we will understand and study the Aversion system of the bone structure, which is a microscopic histology of the bone, that how these cellular and non-cellular structures intermingle together to form a bone. Then I will try to familiarize you with the concept of ossification, that is a bone formation process, and the bone remodeling process. And finally, we will be discussing different types of the bone formation. What are the different types of the bone formation, whether they are formed as intramembranous bones or the flat bones in the babies before birth, or whether they have formed from the cartilaginous templates. So based on these two criteria, there are two types of the bone formation, ossification, and then there are two different types of the bone growth, like we studied the bone growth earlier in cartilage growth. Right, so let's start with our today's lecture. So basically the bone is made up of two types of the compositions. The one are the cells, the other is the matrix, the base or the gel-like structure of the bone. So if we talk about the cells, there are three types of the cells, naming osteocytes, osteoblasts, and osteoclasts. And in the matrix, again, there are two components, two categories. One is the organic part that includes the collagen fibers, mucopolysaccharides, and non-collagenous proteins, and inorganic part of the bone that is basically the deposition of minerals in the bone that includes calcium and phosphorus majorly, and there are other minor nutrients which we discussed in the last lecture. Okay, let's start with the brief description of all these components here. So the bone cells, there are three types. The osteoblast, like the name suggests, osteo means the bone, blast means something which is bombarding the material. So osteoblasts are those bone cells which are responsible to produce the bone material. So they basically produce two different types of the proteins, collagen proteins and peptide proteins. So these proteins, together with some other mineral compounds, are in the form of small packets. Excuse me. And those packets are called osteoids. So the bone material is produced as the smaller units of the minerals and protein complex that are called osteoids. Then the osteocytes are the mature osteoblast cells. Once the osteoblast cells continue producing osteoids, they become embedded within that bone material. And once they are embedded, they become matured and are known as osteocytes. And these osteocytes are always enclosed in the smaller spaces like lacuna. Remember, this is a similar structure as we studied in cartilage in the previous lecture. And there is a third type of the cell in the bone, which is called osteoclast. So osteoclasts are the cells which are responsible for decomposing and dissolving the existing bone and restructuring that and producing the new bone in that part. Right, so consider if someone has an injury, if an animal bone is broken at some place, there must be some mechanism to make the joint between those two broken edges. So osteocytes are the cells which start decomposing and absorbing the bone materials from those cracked parts, and then osteoblasts established at that specific points and produce new osteoids which fuse together, and hence the bone is repaired. Similarly, as the growth happens, some bones needs to be enlarged and uh, both lengthwise and widthwise. So they sometimes have to change the shape to fit into the specific joints. So osteoclast does their function over there as well, where some part of the bone is being dissolved and reabsorbed, while some part has been increased in size and getting more osteoid deposition at the specific locations. Right. So once we move ahead in the bone formation mechanism, you will understand these concepts clearly. Okay, so the inorganic components includes minerals, and they are mostly present in the form of hydroxyl apatites. So these are calcium and phosphate complexes. This, and in generally we can call them bone minerals. Similarly, calcium and phosphate deposits into the bone. You know that 67% of the bone is made up of these inorganic components, and they are responsible for the bone hardness and strength. And the third component is the fibers. These are proteins that provide some sort of flexibility to the bone. While we run, we jump, or the animal has strong physical activities, the bones are capable of having a little bit flexibility to bear that shock. Okay. So that was about the general composition of the bone. So let's move ahead. The coverings of the bone, like the cartilage. You remember the cartilage was covered with a membrane called chondro. What was that? Perichondrium. And here in the case of the bone, we call it periosteum. Right. So peri means circumference, and osteum means uh, bony structure, so bone. So this type of specific membrane is called periosteum. This is the superficial surface of the bone that is covered by periosteum. The internal surface of the central and perforating canal is covered with the similar tissue, but now it is called endosteum. Right? So remember the bone. Imagine the structure of a long bone. When you crack them horizontally, you see a cavity within. So there are two surfaces of the bone. One is the external surface, and one is the internal surface. So the external surface is covered with a membrane or with a layer or the covering called periosteum, whereas the internal surface, it is covered with the similar tissue, but now because it is in the inside, now it is known as endosteum. Right? Both periosteum and endosteum contain osteoblasts and osteoclasts, which are capable of increasing and decreasing the amount of the bone tissue, which is called bone remodeling. Right? So these are the surfaces which has all those materials to produce new bone, and also have all those specific type of the cells which have the ability to produce a new bone or dissolve the older bones. Right. So this is what I have already explained, the type of the cells. So we'll quickly go through them again. Osteoblasts found in periosteum and endosteum cells. They deposit the bone matrix or osseous tissue, and they increase the bone density. Osteocytes are the cells that are surrounded by the matrix, present in the empty spaces or lacuna, and they are not depositing or reabsorbing the matrix. And finally, osteoclasts. They are found in periosteum and endosteum cells that break down the matrix of the osseous tissue, decrease the bone density.